I invite the member for Boundaries Milkameen to lead the House in prayer or reflect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Soldiers are citizens of death's grey land, drawing no dividend from time's tomorrows. In the great hour of destiny they stand, each with his feuds, his jealousies and sorrows. Soldiers are sworn to action. They must win some flaming, fatal climax with their lives. Soldiers are dreamers. When the guns begin, they think of firelit homes, clean beds, and wives. I see them in foul dugouts gnawed by rats, and in the ruined trenches lashed with rain, dreaming of things they did with balls and bats, and mocked by hopeless longing to regain bank holidays and picture shows and spats, and going to the office in the train. Thank you.
Introduction by members. Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Today, on behalf of the Premier, I wanted to briefly rise and pay tribute to Roseanne Moran, who's retiring tomorrow as the Executive Director of the Government Caucus. Roseanne is, as all the people on this side of the House know, but some people on the opposite side of the House know well, is an extraordinary individual, generous and thoughtful and direct at all times. Roseanne has made a contribution to each and every member on the government side. She, I think, lives her politics in the way she treats people, whether they are MLAs, her immediate bosses, or the people that work and report to her in the government caucus or constituency assistants. She is seriously someone who practices the art, I think, of the personal being the political in everything she does. And it's been a great honor for me to work with Roseanne, on and off, mostly on, for about 25 years. I know the Premier feels this exceptionally strongly, and so on behalf of him and all the members on the government side. But of course, Roseanne, it's not just the personal, not just her work as Executive Director. She is a serious political activist for the student movement, for the environmental movement, for the labour movement, of course, through her work with the Canadian Union of Public Employees and many other things. And she comes by it, of course, as the Leader of the Opposition will know, from her mum, Bridget, who is a legend, not just because she's got a statue in bronze, which I suggest all members visit when they go to Prince George. I know the Leader of the Opposition, like me and like dozens of other members of the Legislature, have had pictures with her mom there on a bench in Prince George. But she is a serious political activist, a brilliant woman who has led our team at the staff level with grace and courage and generosity and intelligence. We're going to miss you, Roseanne, but we know the next stage is going to be great. We look forward to working with you and just enjoying life with you as friends for many years to come. So thank you very much, Roseanne.
Member for Langley East.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm absolutely thrilled to rise in the House today to welcome two very, very special guests to the gallery today. The two most important people in my life who I absolutely adore, my two children, my son AJ and my daughter Mackenzie. It's such a privilege to welcome them for the first time to the Legislature and to be able to introduce them today. And I was wondering if the House could please join me in making them feel very welcome today.
Minister of... Sorry? Wow. Minister of State for Infrastructure.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. In all the hubbubaloo of the earlier week of everyone wishing their family members and their pets happy birthday, I realize that I too actually missed a very important birthday earlier this week. I do have a good excuse though. You see, my grandmother, she tracks her birthday according to the Chinese lunar calendar, not the Gregorian calendar, and I never learned to convert those calendars, and so it just kind of snuck up on me. But my grandmother, Kui Xingma, she immigrated here to Canada in 1969 with her 4 sons who dutifully produced 8 grandchildren for her, 2 of whom have produced 5 great-grandchildren for her, while the rest of us slack on that end. Mama, 生日快乐! 我爱你，想你. Would the House please join me in wishing my grandmother a very happy 92nd birthday, I think.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm delighted to introduce Alison Siddon. She's in the gallery today. She's an 18-year-old first-year university student at UBC Okanagan. She's interested in forestry, wildlife conservation. She likes hiking, backpacking, reading, kayaking, knitting, and she is the cousin of our incredibly hardworking and amazing policy analyst, Stephanie Siddon. Would the House please make her feel most welcome?
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Member for Skeena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes we take for granted where our food comes from. Kieran Christensen doesn't. That's why the 31-year-old entrepreneur wants to take her family legacy farm into the 21st century. Daybreak Farms is the sole producer of eggs in northwest British Columbia, and Kieran, like her father before her, understands food security and the need to supply nutritious food to remote and northern BC communities. Daybreak Farms supplies eggs to major supermarkets, independent grocers, and restaurants throughout the region. All the feed is natural with no added antibiotics and produces white, brown, and omega-3 and free-run eggs, and is certified by the Safe Quality Food Institute. But Kieran knows the farm needs upgrades to reduce the environmental footprint and meet current industry standards. That is why Kieran is planning a substantial $10 million modernization project to consolidate operations and replace the pit manure system. This move is also proactive as the British Columbia Farm Industry Review Board ruled that producers can no longer renovate and install conventional systems like the one at Daybreak Farms. And those systems need to be replaced by cage-free or enriched systems by July 1st, 2036. Daybreak Farms has applied to the City of Terrace for a zoning amendment and is now anticipating a public hearing, and hopefully this Daybreak Farms gets the go-ahead. And a couple of excellent facts to know. That's clever. Excellent. World Egg Day is celebrated every October, and this year will be Friday, October 14th. It is also alleged that Kieran married Darcy McEwen a few days ago on top of a mountain. I say alleged because I saw it on Facebook, but I will confirm it for the House. If it's true, congratulations to Kieran and Darcy, and hopefully the celebrations include the approval of the much-needed improvements of Daybreak Farms. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Surrey Panorama.
Mr. Speaker, according to UNESCO, heritage is our legacy from the past, what we live with today and what we pass on to our future generations. Our culture and natural heritage are both irreplaceable sources of life and inspiration, our touchstone, our reference point, and our identity. This week is Heritage Week. Heritage celebrates the conservation and preservation of historic places in the form of buildings, structures, and landscapes. It also celebrates our values, beliefs, customs, and traditions extending into the past. In my riding of Surrey Panorama, we have a gem called Sullivan. Sullivan is seen by many as a new developing neighbourhood. However, the Sullivan Community Association has been active since 1928, when a group of volunteers built Sullivan Community Hall, a heritage building still in use today. The area known as Sullivan was first settled in 1866 by Irish immigrant named James Johnston. Henry Sullivan was attracted to the area and bought a corner section of land where he and Mr. Highland opened a logging company. Henry was joined by his brother Tom, who helped with the logging and later served as mayor of Surrey. The logging company was commissioned by BC Electric Railway to build a right-of-way from Newton to Cloverdale. Thanks to the Fraser Valley Heritage Rail Society, you can ride the original car 1225 from Cloverdale to Sullivan Station all summer long. Sullivan is one of the many historic neighbourhoods in our province. It is thanks to community associations, heritage societies and individual British Columbians who have fought to preserve our history, to have buildings designated heritage status, and who continue to share the stories of the past so that we can appreciate both the beauty of yesteryear and build upon the rich and diverse cultures of today. As we head into nicer days, let us all explore our heritage.
Member for Richmond North Centre.
Anyone who is a fan of films has undoubtedly seen the impact of Vancouver or Hollywood North on the big screen in one way or another. Sometimes Vancouver's influence on the world's blockbuster movie is obvious. It's a curse of being blessed with so much beautiful scenery, but sometimes that influence in films and TV is less obvious, but still great nonetheless. The arts and visual effects of a film are what separate a timeless classic from a flop. They are what help us get lost in the story, characters, and world before us. Metro Vancouver has built an arts and entertainment industry that has become a staple of both our economic and cultural identity. But we did not earn this reputation overnight. It's thanks to our incredible post-secondary institutions that we are able to produce some of the most talented and inspired visual artists. And I was so pleased to learn that many next generation practitioners are going to come from my own riding of Richmond North Centre. Opportunities to learn the skills needed to pursue a career in game development, visual effects, and animation will be expanded and enhanced by a new collaboration between Kwang Lim Polytechnic University and the Center for Entertainment Arts. Nearly 300 students will transfer from Vancouver to Kwang Lim in May, and the university aims to steadily increase the number of seats. It is a landmark achievement to see such an amazing program come to KPU so that we can continue to train and produce artists and industry leaders of the highest caliber here in our own backyard. I would like to congratulate and thank the staff and faculty at KPU and the Center for Entertainment Arts and welcome the many students to Richmond who are about to pursue their dreams of a long and exciting career in our film and video game industries. Together, KPU and Richmond will help ensure BC remains a leader in the world's arts and entertainment industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Victoria Beacon Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to rise today to talk about two incredible organizations that provide specialized and essential mental health care and support here in Victoria. We know the pandemic has had devastating impacts on mental health and wellness across the province. We also know that these impacts are even more significant for those who have faced violence, who are navigating poverty and marginalization, or who are without their traditional community connections. VICR, the Vancouver Island Counselling Centre for Immigrants and Refugees, provides counselling with the support of specially trained interpreters, removing linguistic and economic barriers to care. Counselling is available in Mandarin, Korean, Farsi, Arabic, Punjabi, Vietnamese, and more. Cultural interpretation helps families situate their experience in their own cultural context and helps counselors understand the needs of their clients. Essential and specialized mental health care is also available at Peers, where current and former sex workers can access counseling supports that are safe, empowering, and non-judgmental. Peers Victoria also provides violence prevention and response, increasing services and access to justice for sex workers who have been harmed by violence. Client-centered care is foundational to the services available at both organizations. At Vicar, kids can access art therapy, a more gentle way for children to process trauma and emotion. And at Peers, by ensuring people with lived experience in sex work are on their board and as part of their staff, they provide services that best reflect the needs of those they serve. Mental health care, Mr. Speaker, must meet people where they are at. They must be at the center of the services that they are accessing. This is what these organizations are doing. I'm incredibly proud, Mr. Speaker, that our government continues to fund and support the work at these organizations to ensure culturally appropriate, low barrier, and specialized counseling. And all my gratitude, Mr. Speaker, to these organizations, their staff, their volunteers, and all who provide the services and care in my community and across the region. Thank you.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 151 years ago, a delegation from British Columbia went to Ottawa to negotiate the terms of our province joining Canada. A few years earlier, Immorta Cosmos created the Confederation League. A key goal was to join Canada and to establish in our province responsible government, meaning where the cabinet or the executive is responsible to the people through an elected assembly. While a form of representative government existed in the colonies, the greatest opponents to the efforts of the Confederation League came from powerful, unelected members of the colonial government. They debated the idea of confederation and, ignoring opposition, decided to attempt to join Canada without responsible government. The federal government disagreed. They insisted that we have responsible government here in this province and enticed the BC delegation with pensions for those unelected members who would lose their jobs. 151 years later, we must be mindful that our responsibility is to British Columbians. When question period becomes little more than theatre and second reading debates or a performance, questions go unanswered at committee stage, bills are designed to give regulatory powers to ministries and ministers to fill in the blanks behind closed doors, time allocation limits the democratic duty for deep inquiry, private members' motions are never voted on, private members' bills languish on the order papers with no debate, standing committees have no members, and recommendations on committee reports collect dust. We, in this House, must demand better. The power plays in this chamber do little to serve the constituents who elect us to this democratic institution. They are indeed as self-serving and self-indulgent as our colonial predecessors were. A responsible government respects the processes and protocols of this institution. When this assembly abuses power, undermining and eroding the dignity and integrity of this democratic institution, we find ourselves in a very dangerous spot.
Member for Chilliwack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'd like to talk about a very important organization in Chilliwack, the Ann Davis Transition Society. Their mission statement is Ann Davis Transition Society provides education, prevention, and support services to those affected by abuse or violence. And their vision is communities free from violence and abuse. The genesis of the society was in 1979 when concerned community members formed the Emergency Shelter Committee. They met in private homes and began to look at practical ways that they could help. Members took responsibility to help women obtain medical treatment, deal with the police, contact the Ministry of Human Resources, and locate housing. In 1981, the Emergency Shelter Committee became incorporated as the Upper Fraser Valley Transition Society. It's now time to find a name for the House that would provide shelter for so many women and children. Jean Scott, a member of the UFVTS, did some research and discovered that a local woman named Ann Davis had helped provide shelter for women who were victims of domestic abuse and their children since her arrival in Chilliwack in the 1920s. In 1981, the Ann Davis Transition Society was named in her honor. Today, the society is headed up by its executive director, Patty Makahonic, who some people in the chamber know. And not only does the society give emergency shelter to women and children who are victims of domestic abuse, but it also offers a plethora of counseling and programs for the community. Currently, the Society is hosting Coldest Night of the Year, a family-friendly walk to raise money for local charities, serving people experiencing hurt, hunger, and homelessness. My friend, the member from Chilliwack, Kent, and myself have a team this year, and we're looking forward to the walk this Saturday, and you can go online and donate to our team. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the House would join me in celebrating the Ann Davis Transition Society.
I recognize the Minister of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation to make a ministerial statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a dark day. Ukraine, an independent nation, has been invaded, its territory violated, its people suffering. I join the Prime Minister, the Premier, and allied nations in deploring this illegal and unnecessary war. Make no mistake, this is one man's war. The invasion has caused great distress among many British Columbians, especially for the many who have family and friends in Ukraine. Why should we in this House concern ourselves over war in a distant land? We do so because it is important for people in Ukraine and Russia and around the world to know that we stand with those who want to live in peace. We stand with those who understand that Europe's peace following 2 world wars depends on respect for international law. I have no doubt the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia want to be peaceful neighbors. They have been peaceful neighbors. This war is not the result of 2 societies in conflict. It is an unwanted war of aggression, and it must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. This is a historic moment, a moment fraught with danger. Just across from the Premier's office is a monument called the Spirit of the Republic. It honors the Canadians who volunteered to defend the Spanish Republic against dictators. Those from British Columbia who served are also remembered by a plaque in the upper rotunda. They are remembered because they understood what was under threat. This is a moment when all peoples who believe in peace and democracy need to assert their support and solidarity. We stand with the people of Ukraine. We must.
Official Opposition, House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the words of the Minister. I rise to speak to the fears many of us have right now watching the tragic situation unfolding in Europe today. Fears for friends, for loved ones, for secure democracy, and for the Ukrainian people. Proud, peace-loving, resilient people who have faced more than their fair share of strife, conflict, and heartache throughout their history. But a people that is committed to democracy, and freedom, and international law. Like many in British Columbia, I have strong ties personally to Ukraine. So last night, hearing reports of villages, and towns, and cities facing Russian artillery fire across Ukraine, I was devastated, like so many other British Columbians and Canadians were as well. Villages like the one my great-grandmother called home, and communities throughout Ukraine now facing an old reality, echoes of the tragedies and struggles they faced 80 years ago. As I followed the news last night and this morning, I knew I was joining people all across the world in watching the horror unfold, a war unfolding in Europe. A democracy of over 40 million people under siege. And I was struck by images of women and their children huddled, clutching each other underground in subways with not much more than likely whatever money they were able to grab and the clothes on their backs, with absolute fear in their eyes as to what lay ahead. To the people of Ukraine, we stand with you, and we condemn in no uncertain terms this unprovoked Russian assault. To those of Ukrainian descent who now call Canada and British Columbia home, the largest Ukrainian diaspora, we stand with you and we share in your pain. And to those with friends and loved ones who right now may have their lives in serious jeopardy in what was just 24 hours ago a safe and free democratic nation, we stand with you in calling for this to end. As British Columbians, as elected officials, and as a province, we all must be ready to help. It is not enough to simply condemn from the sidelines. When our federal government responds to this blatant act of aggression in Ukraine, we are calling on the government of British Columbia to support Ottawa's efforts. If part of our national response is severe economic sanctions, we are calling on this government to ensure their provincial jurisdiction over many aspects of our financial system does not impede in any way the efforts to impose concrete and thorough sanctions by our federal government. This is indeed a time when we must stand in solidarity against unchecked militarism and violations of the peaceful international order that so many have fought and died to secure. And a time to assure people experiencing fears and anxieties here in BC, in Ukraine, and all around the world, that good people are ready to respond and prevail. After over 2 years in a global pandemic and armed conflict now breaking out in Europe, there has to be hope. We have to strive towards a more hopeful future. Our collective actions during this crisis will define what that message will be to younger generations, to our kids, and to everyone who lives in Ukraine or any country facing threats to their sovereignty. So today we stand with peace-loving people around the world, with freedom and democracies, with families wanting their youth to come home from conflict zones everywhere. Today, we stand with Ukraine.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I wish to add the voices of our caucus and the support for the Minister's statement, for the statement from the House Leader, from the official opposition. I think we can agree that on this, we are wholly in solidarity with each other and with the people of Ukraine, and wholly against the acts of violence and war that are unfolding right now. Condemnation is the right word for what is happening. As a child of somebody who grew up, who was born in October of 1939 in Europe, I tried to explain to my own child this moment that we're in and how serious it is. The stability and certainty that has been eroded by this pandemic is now being further eroded by these illegal acts of war and violence. And in a time like this, we, in particular, as elected representatives in a democracy, have a burden that is enormous and serious, and we must stand together for peace and democracy. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the average price of most things, as we all know, is growing at an alarming rate. And the used car sector has not been immune to that as well. It wasn't that long ago that a used car, a good, decent used car, was around $6,000 in British Columbia. Today, it's almost $10,000. And now the NDP has decided to change their tax legislation and increase the taxes on those same vehicles. Now, this change, according to the budget book, will primarily impact low and middle income families, families that are already struggling to find a way not just to get a good deal on a car, but struggling to find ways to pay their grocery bill as well. And yesterday when we asked about this, did the Minister of Finance take any responsibility for the change that she has chosen to make to her tax legislation? No. Instead, she chose to try to characterize these hardworking families trying to get by as tax cheats. Why is this minister purposely changing her tax laws with an end result that harms these low and middle income families who are struggling every day just to try to meet the basics for their families?
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we've updated reporting requirements around this to be in line with other provinces. All the other provinces have this, and we've done this in order to be in line with other provinces. But I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, we're also seeing in terms of the used car business, significant shifts in buying, in purchasing of used vehicles. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing a real shift in people being interested in electric vehicles. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we eliminated the PST on used EVs, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 2/3 of Canadians want their next vehicle to be an EV. And this is, again, helping people to make the right choice. In fact, Mr. Speaker, what I want to point out that the Automotive Retailers Association, applauds our announcement to remove the PST on used zero-emission vehicles. They say that this will help make the shift to the electric more affordable for all British Columbians, Mr. Speaker, and that's work that we're going to continue to do.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson, supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but that was a complete evasion of the question. We weren't asking about tax rebates for electric vehicles. We were asking about punitive taxation to low and middle income families. With one hand, the minister is increasing the taxes to those same families on used goods, and with the other hand, quite happily making sure she changes her tax legislation, not a loophole, legislation, to make sure her and her cabinet colleagues can secure a $20,000 pay bonus. Same budget. That's a pretty life-changing amount of money for most people in British Columbia, that $20,000. But let's look at a real example. Let's look at a real example of what real families trying to buy a good, reliable, used vehicle to get around with their families in British Columbia are now facing under this minister's tax changes. There's a 2014 Dodge Caravan listed in Surrey. It's about 150,000 kilometers. We just looked it up. It's now worth around $10,000. Probably was worth around $6,000 not too long ago, but as we know, prices have increased. The tax increase on that vehicle, with this tax policy change, with this tax legislation change, will increase the tax on that vehicle by $200. Now, maybe for ministers who just got a $20,000 raise, that doesn't seem like too much money. But to the vast majority of British Columbians that are $200 away from not being able to pay their bills on any given month, that's a significant change to their affordability. So again, why is the minister so intent with this budget on attacking low and middle income families with changes to her tax policies?
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, this is about bringing us in line with the rest of Canada. We were lagging behind. But I also want to point out that clearly the member doesn't understand the difference between a tax rebate and removing the PST on an EV. He thinks it's a tax rebate. This is much more different than that, Mr. Speaker. This is about removing the PST on used ZEVs. That's a significant difference for people who want to make a difference to protect the environment and to switch over to electric vehicles, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The ministerial accountability measures that the Minister and the Premier are now eliminating were actually born out of the fiscal mismanagement and budgetary manipulation.
Members, let's hear the question, please.
Budgetary manipulation of a previous NDP government. And Mr. Speaker, for the members opposite who don't seem to want to believe that, there are actually a few remaining colleagues of the ministers who they could consult, who will tell them that is true, and will remember the day that as a result, their party was reduced to 2 seats in this House. The legislation that the minister is gutting is actually rooted in the belief that, except in extraordinary circumstances like 2008, like 2020, governments should endeavour to live within their means. And when they don't, there should be accountability visited upon the ministers who are presiding over the government at that time. Why is she eliminating that accountability? And why is she providing the Premier and her colleagues with tens of thousands of dollars in raises in the same budget that increases taxes and makes life less affordable for so many struggling BC families?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, we have ministerial responsibility that will remain, Mr. Speaker. We have a holdback measure to ensure that ministers stick to their budgets. There is an expectation that all of my colleagues will stick to their budgets, Mr. Speaker. We are hanging on to that component part of the holdback. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, you know, the deficit holdback measures really do send the wrong message. You know, the member talked about, you know, what using this measure as a way to do accountability. Well, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, you know, when they were robbing ICBC blind in order to balance their budget so that they could collect their holdback, Mr. Speaker, that was wrong. That was absolutely wrong. They collected their holdbacks, Mr. Speaker. That was important to them, and the way they did that was by increasing MSP, Mr. Speaker. That's how they collected their holdbacks, Mr. Speaker. Those were choices that they made, Mr. Speaker. We're making different choices to invest in people.
Member for Abbotsford West, supplemental.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The minister, I think, is probably frustrated by the fact that we don't believe her. We don't believe her explanations. I have the budget. It's not actually the budget that she delivered this week. It's the budget she delivered a year ago. And on page 33, it says this: the path to balanced budgets. The province will be working over the coming months to finalize a specific timeline to return to balance. The specific timeline, approach, and plan will be presented in Budget 2022. Well, we now have the plan, we have the answer, and the answer is never. Never, Mr. Speaker, contrary to the assurances that the NDP
of the NDP, this minister and this government are committing this province to permanent and ongoing deficits, and all of the pain that that will ultimately impose on future generations. And why are they doing it? I'll tell you why they're doing it. Because it's easy. It's easy, and they know they won't be around to clean up the mess because they never are, Mr. Speaker. But it's...
Members.
He's not going to have to worry about a cabinet increase.
Member will continue.
Mr.
Members, let's hear the question, please.
It's not just the Premier and the ministers who are being rewarded for this great leap backwards into budgeting unaccountability, Mr. Speaker. In July 2017, the Premier's Chief of Staff, Jeff Meggs, signed on for $195,000. By order in Council dated December 17, 2021, just a few months ago, Mr. Meggs' maximum salary was increased from $195,000 to $299,000. $299,000 at a time, Mr. Speaker, when British Columbians are paying more for groceries, they're paying more for gas, they're paying more for vehicles, they're paying more for homes, and in a budget where the government is adding to that burden with new taxes and charges, how on earth is the minister prepared to defend a 34% increase in the wages of the Premier's Chief of Staff?
Minister.
Thank you very much.
Members, let's listen to the answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's interesting. The members on the other side, you know, they increased MSP. They balanced budgets, Mr. Speaker, on the backs of British Columbians. British Columbians paid more so they could give their friends a tax break, Mr. Speaker. And you know what, Mr. Speaker?
Just a second. Just hold it, Minister. Hold it.
And you know what, Mr. Speaker?
Continue.
Let's hear what Lord Gu, the economist with Scotiabank, had to say about this budget. The budget confirmed the province's fiscal resilience facing the past year's health crisis and natural disasters. New spending measures have been announced targeting affordability and healthcare priorities. But the outlook has also incorporated substantial contingencies and prudent forecasting assumptions, Mr. Speaker. We are investing in British Columbians. We are investing in the...
Members, order. Members will come to order now.
We are investing in protecting people and communities. We are making sure, Mr. Speaker, that we have a robust economy going forward, Mr. Speaker, because we invest in people, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January, the Times columnist published an editorial from Kathy Nash regarding the Ministry of Children and Family Development's decision to take back individual funding for children with autism and instead create so-called hubs. We've heard the strong opposition to this plan, and we know that Indigenous leaders are taking control of child welfare, making much of what MCFD does redundant. Nash advanced this theory, quote, "Faced with a loss of power in coming years, they want to centralize all services for children with special needs in their own buildings with greater roles for their own staff," end quote. Nash continues, quote, "Instead of more buildings and wait lists and more policies about how to manage those wait lists, MCFD should increase the reach of individual funding for more children. Instead of trying to tear some families down, they could build up more families," end quote. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Children and Family Development, why hasn't she listened to these parents and rather than entrenching bureaucracy, increase the funding to directly support families of neurodiverse children?
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you to the member for the question. I would like to take this opportunity to make sure that everybody is aware that the new services in the new system that's going to be delivered provincially to support all children and youth with support needs is going to be delivered by community agencies, agencies who know their community and who know how to deliver services to families in their communities. Honourable Speaker,
Members, please.
Budget
Mr. Continue.
2022 signalled the first step in moving towards this new system with an investment of $172 million over the next 3 years so that we can lay the groundwork for building this really important system to serve British Columbia's vulnerable children and youth.
Member for Saanich North and Island, supplemental.
Classic response to child welfare in this province is to find a broken plan from somewhere else and try it here to see if we can make it work. The new plan to grow the Ministry of Children and Families won't be in place until 2025, Mr. Speaker. There are a lot of concerns about a lack of clarity on the plan. It seems like this ministry hasn't mapped out how the system works and is instead leaving families in the dark, Mr. Speaker. In other jurisdictions who've moved to family hubs model, they've done it as a way to keep costs down. Julia Boyle, the Executive Director of Autism BC, said, quote, "One only needs to look at Ontario, where Social Services Minister Todd Smith recently announced their hub-based model failed, and they need to go back and redesign their approach. In the absence of a substantial increase in funding and service providers, the MCFD is likely to rely on gatekeeping procedures." End quote. Mr. Speaker, while children are suffering, this Minister of Children and Families is engaged in bureaucratic shuffling. The minister says children need more services, but must fund and deliver it, not spend millions of dollars reorganizing and disrupting services to our children. Families are experiencing crisis right now, and instead of giving and investing $25 million into a Make Work project for a ministry seeking relevance, wouldn't it be better to invest that money now in actual supports for children with disabilities?
Minister.
Oh, thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, every year since we formed government in 2017, our government has made choices and invested more funding into the Ministry of Children and Family Development. In fact, Budget 2022 included an historic first-time investment in a cross-government system of supports for young people leaving the system of government care. I'd like to reassure families that we are listening to them. We're continuing our engagement sessions. Nothing is changing immediately, Honourable Speaker. We're investing in early implementation areas and we'll continue working with service providers and community agencies as we make that transformation. We are a different government here in British Columbia. We listen to British Columbian families. Our values are to make the choices of investing in children and youth. Our government makes the choices of investing in families, unlike other governments and unlike the other side when they were in government.
Member for Caribou-Chilcotin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's an important deadline coming March 1. That's the deadline for British Columbians to register or risk losing access to groundwater. The government has bungled along, failing to communicate to farmers, ranchers and small business owners who are at risk of losing precious water rights in this province. The NDP has simply failed to properly reach out to those who are being impacted. The latest numbers show that only 1 in 5 historical groundwater users has actually applied for continued use, Mr. Speaker. That means thousands of people could lose access to water in this province. I and colleagues have written to the ministry. This is one last plea, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of thousands of ranchers, farmers and small businesses throughout British Columbia. Will the minister do the right thing and extend the deadline, or will these users be cut off?
Minister of Forests and Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question because it is a good question and it's one that the ministry has been dealing with. And I will remind the member that this process started in 2016 under the previous government. And the reality is it is challenging work, and the ministry has reached out to many organizations to help with this process. There have been some extensions of the deadline, and we found that people said, and people that are working, like we've worked with the BC Cattlemen's Association, the BC Groundwaters Association, the BC Agriculture Council, to encourage their members to sign up. And one thing that the people from these industry organizations told us is that people expect us to just keep delaying the obvious, just keep delaying that we're going to implement this. And so we have reached out to people. We have sent out packages to MLA's offices. We have sent out many support to people. We have hired additional people to help people with the application process. In fact, we had to change the application process because it was so complicated when it was first implemented in 2016. We have heard from people like the BC Cattlemen's Association that it is a lot easier. They don't want to hear the answer. We have heard from people like the BC Cattlemen's Association that it is far simplified now, the process, so we are still working on that. We have people helping them to do that. We are finding that the majority of people who are the big users are saying they are going to sign up. We are hoping that they will do that. We understand the issues and we are working on it.
Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All of us agree on the need for increased access to integrated mental health and wellness services for young people. In fact, in 2015, the previous government created the Foundry program to provide mental health care, substance use services, and family peer supports for youth aged 12 to 24 in physical locations all across British Columbia. Now, even the NDP agreed with the positive impact that these physical Foundry centres have had on our youth and expanded the program post-2017. Last year, the NDP promised to further expand this program this year and add 4 more Foundry centres in physical locations next year. However, despite the mental health and wellness needs of our youth being greater today than ever before, imagine our shock to find in this budget that the centres that were supposed to open this year have been delayed to 2025, and the 4 new centres that were supposed to open next year, well, they're just not in the budget at all. So my question to the minister responsible is very clear. Why is that?
Minister of Mental Health and Addiction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The safety, the mental health of young people is of vital importance to the province, to our government. It's at the center of our Pathway to Hope plan. If we invest in young people early in their lives, whether that's early psychosis intervention, whether it's early years investment in community for mental health with wraparound services, in a multitude of ways, we're investing as a province in young people and their mental health in ways that have never been done before. The pandemic has hit such a blow to families, to young people, and also to the healthcare system and social service organizations that are implementing. So we do not underestimate the need to do more and how hard everybody's working on the front line. So 11 Foundry locations have opened already in British Columbia: Campbell River, Victoria, Kelowna, North Van, Prince George, Vancouver, Terrace, Penticton, Vancouver, Maple Ridge, Pitt Meadows, and Abbotsford. These are centres, physical centres, where young people can be connected with primary care, with sexual care, with substance use support, with mental health counselling. Also during the pandemic, moved in an unprecedented way to offer virtual Foundry supports, and there's a Foundry BC app. Young people can get same-day crisis help or even next-day counselling. So locations in the works are Burns Lake, Comox Valley, Cranbrook, Langley, Squamish, Surrey, Port Hardy, Williams Lake, all announced, all underway for implementation. Last year's budget, it funded 4 more Foundries. We are working with the people with lived and lived experience on the ground to identify those next locations. Nothing has changed from last year's budget about the timing of those openings. We've got more centres coming up where young people will be able to walk in, and then 4 more locations that will be announced in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Opposition House Leader, supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, to the minister, and no one believes anything that you just said. What you've said does not line up with what's actually in your ministry's service plan, or what's actually in the budget. Look, you know, I'm happy to walk the minister through her own service plan. The service plan from last year on page 10 laid out the targets. It laid out the targets for new physical foundry centres that would be opening this year, and 4 new ones that would be opening beginning next year. On page 11 of the service plan for this year, again, that's page 11, the foundries that were supposed to open this year, every single one of them has been pushed to 2025. That's in her service plan.
You should read it if you get a chance.
And as I said in my initial question, the 4 additional foundries that have been promised to communities like Kamloops and Nanaimo and others, they don't appear in the service plan at all. They've been pushed right out. In fact, last year, I specifically asked the minister during her budget estimates about the status of these additional foundry centres. And this is what the minister said to me, and I quote, "Budget 2021 provides additional funding for 4 more centres starting in 2023. That's next year. Communities like Kamloops and Nanaimo should dust off their applications." End quote. I mean, there was great reason for optimism, despite the fact that communities like Kamloops and Nanaimo have been passed over in 6 consecutive budgets now. Kamloops, the community I represent, is the largest city outside of the Lower Mainland that doesn't have a foundry. And regrettably, there doesn't appear to be a path for the city of Kamloops to have one anytime soon. So again, to the minister, with the mental health needs of youth being more acute, more prevalent in communities across the province, more so than ever before, why is she not following through on her commitment, government's commitment, to opening up these additional foundries as originally planned in last year's budget for this year, and the 4 new centres in communities like Kamloops and Nanaimo next year?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nothing has changed in our funding commitment. Nothing has changed in our budget.
Members, hold it. Thank you, members of opposition. Question was asked. Member for Abbotsford West, please. Minister will continue.
I cannot underestimate the impact on frontline social service organizations, on our health authorities, on our healthcare system, to implement the unprecedented budget that we are putting into mental health and addictions. There's never been so much spending. And the timeline for the foundries that were the 8 locations that are in the works, funded during our previous term of government under my predecessor, the first Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Judy Darcy, those haven't been able to open during the pandemic at the pace that we wanted. Nothing has changed in our funding commitment, and the service plan represents what we think is the outside time that we would be able to open them, but the funding is there, and if we can accelerate beyond the service plan, we absolutely will. We know how much the supports are needed. We know how much young people rely on them. That we were able to open the Foundry virtual, the Foundry app. This has been years in the making. Young people are being connected with these services, and there's much more for us to do.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the minister gets up in this House and says nothing has changed. She gets up in this House and says nothing has changed. Clearly, the minister is either not reading her service plans or can't follow the service plans, because there is constant change with this ministry. I'll give an example. It's not just Foundry. It's the same thing with the integrated child and youth mental health teams. And maybe this will be new to the minister, but the target was for 15 teams across the province this year and 20 teams by 2023. The minister just said nothing has changed, but the new target, only 10 this year. There's no mention of 20 teams. Page 10 of the budget of 2021, and I quote, expand the number of Foundry centres to 23 by 23-24, and expand the number of integrated child and youth teams from 5 to 20 teams across BC by 23-24, end quote. A year later, there is change. There is change affecting British Columbians every day when we are losing 6 a day to this crisis, and this minister gets up in this House and says nothing has changed. The priorities of this government have changed. Can this minister get up in this House today and defend these cuts?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the crisis of mental health and substance use facing families and young people in British Columbia has never been worse. And there has never been so much invested in this system. And nothing has changed in our budget commitment. In our budget commitment, nothing has changed. $97 million invested in last year's budget. The integrated child and youth teams, which were previously announced for 5 communities across the province, are bringing together.
Minister will continue.
For a government on the other side that gutted services for a decade for the most vulnerable children to not even have the respect to listen to the answer is surprising to me. Integrated child and youth teams bring together people from the education system, from Ministry of Children, Family and Youth, from the health authorities,
members,
and from community service organizations. And we will implement them as quickly as we can.
Order, please, order. Members. All members, order. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The systems change to implement integrated child and youth teams has never been done before, and we will not lead families astray about the complication of putting those teams together, and we will get them up and running as soon as we can, and that is the commitment of our budget and of my service plan.
The bell ends the question period. Acting Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. On behalf of the Government House Leader, I move motion number 3 on the order paper.
Members, you have heard the Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise to speak to the motion on the order paper and the recommendations of that motion. To put names to the committee, select standing committees. I recognize it is not typical for a member to speak to this report. However, it is a debatable motion. But unlike so many other motions and reports, we tend to have a very pro forma, scripted response to moving these through the House. I'd like to point out to Mr. Speaker and to the House that under Standing Order 68-1, which provides for the select standing or permanent committees of the Legislative Assembly, all select standing committees are appointed on a sessional basis at the start of each session of a parliament. This is not up to the Premier's office. This is a standing order that we use to guide our work in this House. Given where we are at I do think it is important that comments are made about the approach to committees in this House, to the membership of those committees, to our expectation of the work that those committees do, and to how that work is valued by governments. We are a parliamentary democracy. The first bill passed at the beginning of each session is the Act to ensure the supremacy of Parliament, essentially a piece of legislation that gives, quote, the right of the Legislative Assembly to give precedence to matters other than those expressed by the sovereign. As is pointed out in the legislation, this dates back to the reign of Elizabeth I. As an assertion of independence from the Crown for the purposes of legislation, I will note that this very clearly states Parliament, not government. Government consists of the cabinet members. Parliament is all of the members elected as representatives for our communities. We are not here to just witness or to just vote or to just oppose. We are each of us here as representatives with duties and responsibilities as legislators, and I would suggest that we should always be asking ourselves, how do we serve better? I'm going to point to some comments made by George McMinn in a 1982 report on committees. He said, one must consider the benefits of a well-designed committee system as follows. Parliament is brought closer to the people by allowing submissions and representations by individuals and groups to be made directly to the members of the Legislative Assembly. Committees provide a forum which tend to minimize the adversary system or confrontation syndrome typical of all large chambers, thereby leading to more earnest examination of matters with correspondingly less politicking. Committees facilitate detailed consideration of legislation and estimates. They permit examination of witnesses when necessary, enables two or more arms of the legislative body to proceed with House business simultaneously, provide an effective method of bringing members of the legislature and the bureaucracy together, and would therefore tend to introduce a new concept to government decision-making, bureaucratic responsibility. On a day when we are absolutely united in our respect and concern for democracy, Honourable Speaker, I think that we should be continually asking ourselves, how do we make sure that we are upholding the most important values of democracy? What we do here should not just be theatre or performance. Members say over and over again, indeed my colleague walked in today after his committee meeting and said, this is the work I am most proud of. When we work in committees, we work together as elected representatives. We work in service. We have had an all-party approach to review health regulations in this province. We have had an all-party committee to make recommendations for regulating ride-hailing. We have had the BC Wild Salmon Advisory Council. We can surely recognize that while we are dealing with so many overlapping crises, there hardly seems to be an argument against bringing the members of this House together to work collaboratively in a nonpartisan way to urgently recommend solutions that will be supported by all three caucuses. Considering the drug poisoning crisis and the call that the leader of the official opposition and I have made for over a year to bring this House together in a committee to look at the urgent solutions that can be implemented to try to prevent the deaths of 7 people a day. I say that it is not enough, Honourable Speaker, to simply put names on these select standing committees, which our predecessors have indicated are meant to be a part of the legislative work of this House, not as something that just gets named and then left and nothing happens. We have not had a health committee since 2017. But I will point out that the work of the previous health committee was formidable, was commendable, actually should have been a roadmap that should have been used for the last 5 years in this province. Because had it been, we might not be seeing the level of death and loss that we are seeing as a result of the poison drug crisis today. I'm going to point out that of the 59 recommendations of the previous Health Committee and all-party committee, two-party committee at the time, that worked for 3 years, its final recommendation, number 59, support and expand evidence-based initiatives or programs for safe and controlled access to currently illicit substances. In 2017, a committee of this House recommended to government that we move forward with safe supply as a means to end the deaths. It is not enough to simply put names on these committees. It is not enough to simply have these committees gather. These committees are the work of democracy and this body of the legislature, and I would ask that this government and this assembly recognize the absolutely integral part of democracy that exists in these committees and to empower them to do the good work that they must do and then use them as guidance. As is meant to be, we are 87 representatives in here, not 24. And so I will close my comments, Honourable Speaker, gratefully to you for allowing me this time to speak to this and to say, let us show our commitment to democracy by using the democratic tools that have been fought for by our predecessors for hundreds of years, not to shrug them off, not to think of them as performance, but to recognize that all of us come here in service, and all of us improve that service when we work together.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I first of all, I want to thank my colleague and friend, the leader of the Green Party, for her passionate words today. I know how much this matters to her and to all of us in this legislature, and I very much appreciate the collaborative approach that she has worked with us on some of these important issues. There couldn't be a more fitting day, I think, for us to have this conversation, and people may be sitting back and thinking, well, this is just a boring discussion about a motion that comes regularly to this chamber. And I want to start by saying that we understand this isn't about delaying the work of important committees. We understand that, and we know that there is work that has to be done by committees. So we don't want to stand in the way of bringing those committees to activation today and to allow them to begin their work. But this is about how we do our work in this place. And there was profound speeches this morning about how important it is that we honor democracy and that we actually utilize the system that's been in place in this place for generations. I do want to begin by recognizing the opposition House Leader, the government House Leader, for moving these committees forward. It seems like such a simple thing. Let's just bring the committees' names and let's populate them. We're saying today, and we are urging the government, it is one thing to populate the committees, it is absolutely another thing to activate the committees. And as I build on the remarks of my colleague, there is in the mandate letter of every single minister in this legislature a requirement that they work across party lines. And let me quote what the mandate letters say. And I quote, "That means seeking out, fostering, and championing good ideas regardless of their origin," end quote. Seems to me that there are a lot of skilled, passionate, thoughtful people elected to this legislature, and it's beyond me as to why it is so difficult for the government to take advantage of that skill set, that passion, those interests. Parliamentary standing committees have a role to play in the work that we do together. And I would agree with my colleague. I have heard when I have been involved in committee work, I can remember people leaving that committee room saying, I wish British Columbians could see what goes on in committee instead of just what goes on in question period. Why? Because it's productive, it's thoughtful, it's progressive. That's why parliamentary committees matter. It allows for expanded discussions. We don't get to have that kind of conversation in this place, and the conversation this morning is a prime example of that. We've never had this discussion before. It allows us to utilize expertise, bring ideas and input into those committee rooms. And then it allows, if it works properly, those discussions, it helps to inform policy direction or, in fact, lawmaking. We on this side of the House, along with the leader of the third party, have repeatedly asked for the select standing committees on health and Aboriginal affairs to be activated. Today, we are pleased to see we've taken the step. The government House leader has populated the committees. Now we need to see them activated. As we continue on our path toward reconciliation, we know that the critical work of advancing reconciliation can't be left to a minister, to a premier, or even a government. It needs to involve everyone in British Columbia, and it needs to include all of us in that work, especially those of us who are elected to represent constituents across this province. That work obviously needs to be led by First Nations. But I'd like to remind the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation this morning of his own words, and I quote, "I think the idea of a standing committee of the Legislature on Aboriginal affairs being reinvigorated is definitely an idea worthy of consideration, and I will ask my government to consider that as we go forward." End quote. That from the minister responsible, asking his own government to actually activate the committee. Today we've received the names, Mr. Speaker, of members who are willing and eager to serve on that standing committee. I will also remind the Premier of his commitment to the member from Skeena when he said, and I quote, whatever steps we can take, whatever resources need to be brought to bear, with his help and with the help of other members of this House, I am confident that we can bring together a plan that all of us can be proud of." End quote. The words of the Premier, the words of the Minister. Reconciliation will take more than words. We need to move beyond those words and into action. And one way that we can demonstrate that is to expand our commitment to work across party lines. And we could begin that process by activating the Select Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs. And when we look at our health system, all of us can see, and I know the Minister is grappling with this, we have a system under pressure. It has been stretched in many cases, despite the outstanding work of people on the front lines day after day after day. It is a system under pressure. We're witnessing a 911 system in crisis. When you live in British Columbia, you should be able to dial 911 and expect someone to respond. And the Minister and others in this House would know that it proved catastrophic during the heat dome last summer. We have a growing doctor shortage. Families, young and old, are wondering how they're ever going to find a family doctor. And we know that's the case even in the Premier's own backyard. I can barely say the words. We have witnessed the single worst year for overdose deaths in British Columbia's history, where 2,224 British Columbians lost their lives. So I'll remind the Health Minister as well, who said this, and I appreciated it, and I quote, "I think there's no question that we can use parliamentary committees more," end quote. We may agree to disagree on many things, but that is something that I wholeheartedly agree with the Minister on. If ever, Mr. Speaker, there was a time to activate the Select Standing Committee on Health, it is now. British Columbians want assurance that these issues are a priority for their government, for their elected officials, no matter what side of the House they sit on. The Premier said that he would take good ideas no matter where they came from. The permanent committee structure of this Parliament is one small way that we can begin to do our work differently. It is time to show British Columbians that we can actually do business differently, that we can be better together. And frankly, we must be better together. During the final question period of the previous session, I raised this issue, and the government House Leader responded. I will take this opportunity to remind him of his answer. He said, and I quote, "Absolutely, there are opportunities for cross-party cooperation." And in a subsequent response, he said, and again, I quote, "I don't see any reason why we cannot do more." It is so important, Mr. Speaker, that the government make the next step. Today, we are heartened by the fact that the committees now have names on a piece of paper. We need to do better than that. Together with my colleague, the leader of the Green Party, we call on the government to honor its commitment to accepting good ideas, no matter where they come from, and take the next step to activate the committee to deal with the critical issues like reconciliation and a healthcare system under pressure. All of us want to ensure that we have a top-quality healthcare system today and in the future. All of us, everyone in this House, wants to find a way to end the record-breaking number of overdose deaths that we hear about in this chamber and in our province month after month after month. And all of us want to find a meaningful path to reconciliation. And I will admit this, undoubtedly there will be uncomfortable conversations at the committee level. And I know this as well. We will not agree on everything. But that is what the system has been designed to do, to allow for expanded conversation, to bring ideas to the table, to find areas of consensus. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to express my gratitude to you for allowing us to have this important conversation today. There is work to be done. Not one person in this House leaves it not thinking about the fact that more than 6 people a day are dying in British Columbia. We know that. We hear that. It's time we did something about that and demonstrated to British Columbians that we are big enough, that we are responsible enough to do that work together. So I join with the leader of the third party, and together we respectfully ask the government to now activate the standing committees on health and Aboriginal affairs to demonstrate, Mr. Speaker, to British Columbians that these issues are a priority for every single member of this legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Saanich North End Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and speak to this motion. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that what we're doing here today is actually standing and asking for the government to use the tools of this House that it should be required to use, frankly. These are tools that are used by healthy democracies right across the country. And in fact, British Columbia remains an outlier in our use of these tools, and I think that it's important, the committees, as my colleagues, the leader of the official opposition, the leader of the third party, have mentioned that this is a place where we can grow consensus. This is a place that we can invite the public into their House to inform the debates that happen here, to inform public policy, and in a House that's functioning properly, those are functions that we, as democratically elected representatives, would invite. Not that we would have to disrupt the regular, normal flow of this, where you could see the frustration and even in some cases the anger on the faces of people when you stand up to debate a motion that's a debatable motion. This is a function of this House. There should be no offense taken to that. Shouldn't be red in the face by it. And when that occurs, what it shows and what it demonstrates is that there is a basic lack of respect for the actual tools that we have as legislators, granted to us by the people who elected us here, to engage in it. So this morning I showed up here at 8 a.m. because we had the Committee for the Reform of the Police Act. My friend from North Cowichan, Nanaimo, North Cowichan, has been the chair of that committee over a number of sessions now, and we have had an extremely productive discussion. And now I look to the membership of the committees that are being put in front of us today, and I hope for them. I hope for the members of those committees the same experience that we have felt, I think collectively, sitting around the table, growing consensus on a very important topic that British Columbians have brought before us. And when we look at the select standing committees, the memberships that are being put on paper today for the committees that we are now discussing, I think that what we can see is the value that the members that have been put on those lists to be able to provide very important matters of debate that this province requires consensus in this House in order for us to ensure that what we don't have is policy lurch, where when we have consistency from one government to another, that policy has been informed by the public and that we can undertake the business. I look at the rental housing task force that I've been a part of. The government stands up regularly in question period and touts the multiple point plan that was drafted by myself and my colleagues, the Deputy Speaker and the member from Comox Courtney. And we did that work together. We drove across Surrey together and had conversations about the good work that that committee did, informed by the public and informed by the people. It's regularly celebrated in here. And I look forward to that for the Aboriginal Affairs Committee, because I've also heard the Minister of Indigenous Relations and many members here state very clearly that the decision that was made by this House unanimously to pass the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act was a unanimous decision. We celebrate that. We elevate that point. And I think that what's important is that we recognize that the work in reconciliation necessarily needs to be done through a consensus-based approach through that committee work. So I support my colleagues, both the Leader of the Official Opposition and the Leader of the Third Party, and in celebrating the fact that there are names on the list that we're debating today. And now let's activate those committees so they can go and do the good work in building consensus on behalf of the people of British Columbia. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you. On behalf of the Government House Leader, I want to thank the speakers and both party leaders for their comments this morning. Honourable Speaker, I move motion 3.
Members, you have heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Acting Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I call continue budget debate.
Member for Parksville Qualicum.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It is an absolute honour to be able to stand up here today and debate and respond to the budget. All of my colleagues on the other side, I hope you can stay for this important discussion. Before I begin with the debate to the budget, welcome, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin with the debate to the budget, I'd like to thank the member from Coquitlam-Mayardville for all of the incredible work, both with her and her team, in putting together a $73 billion budget with $39 billion in capital funding over the next 3 years. This is important work, this is hard work, and this is work that will make life better for people all across British Columbia. We've had a number of sessions as of late with the Minister and Jade Ashbourne to discuss the details of the budget and how it will impact our individual constituencies. And we can get the sense not only of true competency with the numbers and really understanding the file, but also understanding how important these decisions are to the people in our communities all across this province. It's also important to thank not just the members of the Minister's office and the Minister itself, but also all of those who contributed to this budget process. That includes delegations, it includes committees, and it includes MLAs on all sides of this House, bringing forward important issues for their community and bringing them forward in a way that helps us all move forward together. There is one important part of this budget that I want to focus on, but before that I want to quickly tell the story of my grandfather. He was elected in 1948 as a member of Hanley, Saskatchewan. That was a good time for Saskatchewan. It was a good time for Canada, a peaceful time, a time that, as we reflect now, obviously is in a serious matter. But so he was elected in 1948, and he, working with Tommy Douglas, worked for many, many years to bring forward public health care in the province of Saskatchewan. And he was there through the whole process, 19 years, right through when Lloyd Woodrow brought the bill in, through the doctors' strike, and brought that through to the people of Saskatchewan. And it's important, a social program like public health like this, to always remember what it was like before and what the impact on programs like this has on families in our communities. When a child is sick, to know that you can go to the doctor and not worry about what that will cost you, to not have to balance your rent, your food, and access to health care that we all need. It's a right that we have here in our country now. And that is a social program that is a legacy that has been left for future generations that we all benefit from today. And one of the important things that we see in this budget, work that's continuing since 2017 right through today, is the work that we're doing with childcare. Childcare is moving into the Ministry of Education. It is a massive investment in a social program that will make lives better for so many families across our province. And it's not just about the parents. For childcare is a challenge that we have. While being elected for the first time as a councillor in the town of Qualicum Beach in 2019, we had a committee that was struck, and I want to read into the record the names of the members of this committee, because it's important to remember that what we do, we always do as a team. This committee had Judy Malcolm, and she was a representative of the school district. So this was a committee with the goal of bringing childcare into our community. So we have a member from the school district, Eva Hilborn, 94 years old, the most energetic person I have ever met, and she wanted to do anything she could to bring more childcare into our community. Julie Austin, a school board trustee, who knew that as an elected official at a school trustee level, that it was important that childcare come in under the Ministry of Education and come in on school sites so that we can have some continuation of care for children. Stuart McLean, who's a good friend of mine and is a RDN director for Area H. Councillor Adam Frass, who's the City of Parksville councillor. A woman by the name of Perry Perry, who is always there. I don't know how old she is, but she's, again, a wealth of energy for the people of our community, whether it's tackling homelessness or other social initiatives. She is there to lead the charge. We had representatives from the Qualicum First Nation, Pacific Care, which is a group that, and the representative from Pacific Care at the time was Sarah Martman, I believe, and they offer support to child care operators within our community. Carol O'Connor, a retired child care operator. Sarah Foster, who works with the Boys and Girls Club of Vancouver Island. Diane Gerard, who operated a for-profit, we call it a for-profit child care center. We know that for-profit child care centers don't necessarily mean that they are for-profit. She is a woman who has dedicated her life to ensuring that people in our community had access to child care. We had a member of the Chamber of Commerce there. We had the director from Area F, Leanne Salter. I have a whole list here. I'm not going to, and Sharon Gregson, of course, and her advocacy for childcare across our province. And the reason I mention all these names is because it's a team effort. We know that we need childcare in our community, and in 2019, this committee was struck with the goal of creating childcare. Shortly thereafter, a representative from the province came down and said, well, have you heard of the New Spaces Fund? It's a 100% grant to build the capital portion of new childcare spaces in our communities. And we jumped on it. the town of Qualicum Beach applied and was granted approval for the construction of 37 spaces of affordable, accessible quality childcare in the town of Qualicum Beach. And this is in a community where, when you talk to the private operators, the infant and toddler care, so 0 to 3 years old, the wait list to get on infant and toddler care in Qualicum Beach prior to this was 3 years old, or 3 years. Well, think about that. You have a child, and you need to get childcare, and you put your child on that list. The infant and toddler care spaces are no longer there for you because your child is more than 3 years old by the time the space comes up to use it. That is, to be honest, that's shameful. It holds families back. It holds businesses back who needs workers, and it holds children back who need access to care. So working as a team with representatives of local government, with provincial government, with existing profit and non-profit operators, we saw 37 spaces approved in Qualicum Beach. We saw 43 spaces approved at an on-site space with Diane Gerard's before and after school care. And before and after school care is so important so that parents don't have to decide who it is that's going to work today or not work, how to balance a budget with less employment income. And to have it on a site that is at a school means that child can then go to the school, get accustomed to that environment, and then when they go into their primary education, they have that continuity. So these are two exciting projects, but that's not the end of it. In Stenauas territory, Stenauas First Nation was approved a childcare site, and this is exciting because this is not just childcare. It's also about reconciliation, and it's about bringing people together. So this childcare site, Ui Squala Wun, I hope I've done that properly, is 85 new spaces of childcare, and it's more than that. It's a community center. It's a place for not just people living on reserve, but the whole community to come together to raise our children together. In this program, there's spaces for 12 infant and toddler spaces. We know how important those are in our community. 24 spaces for children aged 3 to kindergarten, and 25 spaces for school-aged children, and 24 spaces of preschool care. What is exciting to me about this is it will feature Hulkminam language immersion, and it also offers parenting workshops. So this is not a babysitting service. This is a service where we can make sure that the next generation of children, the next generation of people in our communities have the absolute best start that they can. And it brings together our community on reserve, off reserve, as one people, trying to make sure that we do the best we can for future generations. Just right next to this center is a new facility that's been approved at Seaview Elementary Learning and Childcare Center. This is done through School District 68, a school district that has many, many childcare spaces opening up all through the city of Nanaimo to create that continuum of learning for young children. This is an exciting program, and it's not to be outdone by the City of Parksville. The City of Parksville has a city hall that adjacent to it is a community center, and we all saw through the pandemic the challenges of operating community spaces with the restrictions that we saw. And when the opportunity came up for the City Council in Parksville to apply to the New Spaces Fund and other opportunities to rejuvenate the space, they jumped on it. And we now have, under construction right now, 90 spaces of affordable, accessible, quality childcare moving forward in that space, in that center. And the building that it's in is a building that has served multiple purposes in its past. When I was growing up in our community, that was the site of a middle school. And that middle school, I was the last year that went through that middle school. It was old when I was there, and it had been repurposed. So this was a government-run school. It's an asset for the community. And at the end of its life, working with the City of Parksville, this facility was rejuvenated for other uses as a community center and as a gathering place for people all throughout our community. And now we're at the position where
we're looking for renewal of this space. And the Boys and Girls Club of Central Vancouver Island have stepped up as operators, and they've committed to not only operating this very important childcare in our community, but they're going to continue the legacy of creating a gathering space for our whole community to come together for community events on evenings, during the day, on weekends, wherever they can make that work within the setting of the childcare space. And I say that because, again, it's this idea of a team, everybody working together to maximize an asset and to make sure we're doing the best we can to support all of those in our community, regardless of their socioeconomic background and their starts in life. Since launching the BC Childcare Plan, Childcare BC Plan, I've got a number of notes that I've highlighted here in the budget because this is exciting work. Since launching the Childcare BC Plan in 2018, we've invested $2.4 billion towards building affordable, accessible, and high-quality childcare services all across our province. And it's important because bringing this back to the story of my grandfather is the legacy that we're leaving through this new social program will create opportunities for families all across our community. And it's not just about the children and the families. When I talk to small business owners in our community, there's a real struggle right now to find labor, to have access to labor market. And one of the barriers that we see is for people with young children is accessible childcare. We will not only see that this accessible childcare by creating hundreds of new spaces all across our community, but we will also see this be affordable childcare. By the end of 2022, people in my community and communities all across our province will see a 50% reduction in the average fees that parents pay for childcare, resulting in approximately $20 a day for childcare. This is game-changing for so many families across our province, and it is a massive step towards our commitment to seeing $10 a day childcare all across our community. To date, we have funded more than 26,000 spaces of childcare, and again, coming back to this idea of teamwork, the federal government has noticed the work that we're doing here and the work that's being done in Quebec and the positive impact that it has on the people in our community. And they have come with us to fund an additional 30,000 new licensed childcare spaces within the next 5 years. This is incredibly important work. And it's work that we do as a team with others within this government, the other side of government, within the federal partners, within local government who have the approving authority and often have the land, with school districts, with nonprofit societies, and with for-profit childcare centers. It's also interesting to look at in Arrington Elementary, there's a program that is called Seamless Childcare. And so what that means is that this is childcare that's operating within an existing school site, and kids will come before school and after school. They will have access to early childhood educators, fully trained, fully accredited early childhood educators that will look after kids before and after school. And then the seamless portion of this comes in when these kids are in kindergarten and grade 1. They go to their class, and the early childhood educators that were looking after them and nurturing them before and after school time is there to follow through with them through the school day. And we know that this leads to better outcomes for these children in the future. And these investments will make a massive difference to the lives of these children as they become adults working and living in our communities. And of course, seeing that this work is moving from the Ministry of Children and Family Development to the Ministry of Education and Childcare is going to mean that we will be able to continue this and to solidify this work into a lasting social program that we see for generations to come. The other barrier when I talk to small business owners in our community is of course housing. Housing is a massive challenge for people all across our community, and it's not just with the rapidly rising prices of housing in our community, but the imbalance that it creates for those who are renting. We probably every week have someone come into our constituency office, generally female, generally 60, 70 years old, who have been living in our community for years. And they come to our office, unfortunately, often way too late. You know, they have an eviction notice and they say, well, what do I do? I was given this 6-7 weeks ago and I have to leave. And you know, they're paying $700 a month, $800 a month.
and there's nowhere for them to live in the community, regardless of the monthly income that they have, which will not cover the market rentals. There are no market rentals available in our community. And so it's a challenge that we face in our community, but it's a challenge that working with local governments as a team, we are addressing in a significant way. In Qualicum Beach, we saw recently the announcement of 56 new affordable spaces in our community in partnership with Kiwanis Housing. And these are spaces that are designed for families. These are spaces that are designed for people with diverse abilities. These are spaces that for about 30% of the residents will be rent geared to income. And so people on a fixed income in our community that are not able to keep up with the market conditions are able to live in their homes affordably, paying 30% of their income and being able to afford to live, to feed themselves, to look after themselves, to pay for their prescriptions. It's an incredibly important initiative because we know that housing affordability is a challenge, and for many of us, we do what we can to meet that challenge, but for so many in our community that can't, we need to make sure that those supports exist so that we don't have to tell people in our community that they have to live in their car. We have people in Qualicum Beach that are single women in their 70s that park on the waterfront at night, and that's what they call home now, and that's not good enough. In the city of Parksville, we've approved and funded 86 units of affordable housing for seniors specifically. And working with the city of Parksville and the Ministry of Housing, creating these spaces will create a safety net for people so that they don't fall through the cracks. So we don't have people who have contributed to our community for decades having to leave the community or have to live in their car just to find a place to stay out of the elements. The New Spaces Fund, not the New Spaces Fund, the Community Housing Fund is what we are using in our community, and I hope to see more projects like this launch all across our province. So 50% of these housing units, these homes, we call them units, but they are homes. These are places for people to live their lives. They are geared to people with household incomes up to $64,000. So that housing that we create is permanent housing available to people who are unable to enter the housing market otherwise. 30% of these households are for people with incomes up to $74,000, and 20% of these households are for people with very low incomes. These are people who are on income assistance, PWD, some other forms of disability compensation. And this is so important because it helps people from falling through the cracks. And a measure of how effective we are in government is how we look after those who are the most marginalized in our communities. It's more than just housing and childcare, though. This budget talks about so many important things that are going on right now. We've had a number of discussions with constituents about how we're going to manage old growth forests in our province. And this is a very difficult decision for us. We live in a province that has relied on the extraction of resources all throughout the province for the history, I should say the colonial history. The history of our province has been quite extractive. And we know that there are people in our communities, in the communities of northern Vancouver Island, all up and down the coast, that rely on the jobs that come from the harvest of old growth forest. But we know as we balance values and we always reflect on the values that we have in our communities, we have to balance the value of jobs, the values of the economy, but also watershed health, the health of ecosystems, the health of a genetic diversity of species that once it disappears may not ever come back. And so in 2019, through the Old Growth Strategic Review, our government launched the largest engagement session that government had seen up to that point. People are very passionate on all sides of this, very passionate about old growth forests. And following through the 14 recommendations, our government has been methodical and communicated as best as we could about why it's important to protect these ecosystems, but also balance the need to respect Indigenous lands rights and the jobs that we see reliant on these communities. And what I'm excited to see in this budget is a commitment and an understanding of the impacts that this change will have. And I just want to read this into the record because it's so important. Budget 2022 provides more than $185 million over the next 3 years to bring forth coordinated and comprehensive supports to help workers and contractors, industry, communities, and First Nations to adapt and to respond to the impacts of deferrals. That is incredibly important. 2019, we deferred 250,000 hectares of old-growth forests all across our province, most of which on central Vancouver Island. And through the important work of the Technical Advisory Panel, it was a body of experts in the ecosystems that we have in our forest, made recommendations to our government to defer 2.6 million hectares of old-growth forests in collaboration with Indigenous people. And that's a massive commitment. And it was a massive ask. And our government said, yes, we will commit to doing that and we will do that. But with that comes the responsibility to look after those that are impacted. $185 million for supports to make sure that people aren't left behind in the wake of this dramatic change. Now, we have seen similar important work done on fisheries in the North Island. Those supports didn't exist. When the federal government canceled leases for 19 fish farms, we know that we have to improve the way we manage our ecosystems. But this is how things are done differently in the province of British Columbia. The impacts that we have, we are responsible to making sure we look after those people who are impacted by these decisions. And it's work that I'm proud to say I'm a member of this caucus, because throughout this budget, it's about people. It's about making sure that every decision we make puts people in the best position for the future and looking after the long-term health of our communities. I have notes here on clean industry. I'm noting that I'm running out of time. I'll quickly jump to primary care. I see the member for, don't recall, Vancouver Kingsley, who often goes by the title of Minister of Health. It's the work that we're doing in primary care right now that's being funded through investments that we've seen in the past and is continuing on is absolutely massive for the people of my community. We just opened a permanent location for a nurse practitioner clinic. And I've met with many people who say, I want a doctor. And then we go through the process and explain the scope of care. Okay, so a doctor has a scope of care which is quite broad. But what we have at our nurse practitioner clinic, which is fully funded with $4.6 million of increased annual funding in our community. It was a $1.4 million capital investment. What we have at that clinic now are 5 nurse practitioners with a very extensive scope of care that are also working with a nurse practitioner psychiatric specialist as well as a nurse pharmacist. And we have a broader scope of care at that practice than we would at your traditional family doctor. We have a plan at that facility to bring on 2 doctors, 6 nurse practitioners, and to connect 7,400 patients to a facility that is resilient. If a practitioner retires or passes away or moves on or has some family circumstance, patients in our community are attached to the clinic, not to an individual practitioner, which creates the resilience that we need to see in our primary care moving forward. And it's important investments like this that allow for our community to give trust and faith that we are there to support them when they need it. And of course, as we talk about healthcare, written in this budget is the again, commitment to a cancer care center at Nanaimo's Regional General Hospital. That is a massive commitment of our governments and the people, not just in Park Sequoia, not just in the Nanaimo area, but for people anywhere north of the Malahat who need access to high-quality cancer treatment right in our community. This is integral to the health of people in our community. And to see this moving forward in the planning process and moving forward to the next stages of development is just so important for the people who rely on us listening to them in our community. And it's not just patients who get that phone call from their doctor, the worst day of their lives for many of them with a diagnosis. but the advocacy that we're getting from our hospital foundation, from our local government, and now from service groups that want to be able to be a part of this important work and champion it is just so exciting to see. Post-secondary housing. We talk about the importance of creating housing in our community. And the announcement of creating new post-secondary housing at North Island College in the Comox Valley will create not just hundreds of units of housing for students, but it will open up that housing in the housing market in the Comox Valley. 1.3. Noting the hour. Noting the hour, I will not require continuation. I will move adjournment of the debate.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Acting Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the speakers who spoke this morning. And with that, we'll be back in a short while and move adjournment of the House.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1 p.m. this afternoon.